Okay, we have a lot to cover here. We're in Hebrews chapter 10, verse 35, going all the way to chapter 12, verse 3. The first question is this: a primary focus of chapter 11 is to prove the point made in verse 2. How would you summarize that point, and how does the rest of the chapter prove it? Now, this is a very popular chapter of the Bible. It's referred to as the Hall of Faith. It's a listing of many of the great patriarchs and even some matriarchs of the Old Testament, and listing the emphasis on their faith, giving the emphasis on their faith and their acts that resulted from their faith. But verse 2 says this, speaking of faith from verse 1, this is what the ancients were commended for. And that, I believe, is a good summary of the entire chapter here. He's trying to prove here that all of these great men and women of old, the reason that they are great, the primary feature of their life, what they were commended for, is their faith. And faith is the engine that drove all of these great acts. Now, the Hebrews here, the author, the audience of this epistle, the Hebrews would have grown up or knowing these great men and women, knowing Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, David, Moses, knowing all of these people, revering all of these people, and thinking about all the acts. Maybe as they grow up, they would want to do some of the things that David did, would want to be able to be the great prophet of Israel like Moses, or want to be like Elijah. And so they would have a great, strong affinity towards these individuals here. That's how they grew up with the Old Testament. But the New Testament emphasis on faith seemed to be a distinct feature. It seemed to be something that was coming up that was not emphasized in the Old Testament. But what the author here is proving is that all of the works and all of the actions done by these great men and women were done by faith. It was faith that made those works and those great actions of any significance. And so here we go through, and that's the next question. Choose 3 people from chapter 11 and list what the chapter records they did because of their faith. And then the next question is to list things that God did to or for them because of their faith. Just quickly, I'll mention 3 that show this together, and these just give a good template for the entire chapter here. The first one we'll look at is Abel in verse 4. By faith, Abel offered God a better sacrifice than Cain did. So his faith drove him to do the action of offering a better sacrifice. But then also it says by faith he was commended as a righteous man. And so because of his faith, we see here God commends him. When he spoke to Cain, he commended him as a righteous man, speaking well of his offerings and giving the contrast with Cain, saying if you do well, implying if you do well like your brother. And so we see here again the commending of Abel, but that's because of his faith. The next example is jump down to Noah in verse 7. By faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear, built an ark to save his family. The thing he did by faith was he built an ark to the saving of his family. And it says by his faith he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness. So that's again something he did by faith. Let's look at an example of something that God did for an individual in response to their faith. That's going into the story of Abraham here. Verse 11, by faith Abraham, even though he was past age and Sarah herself was barren, was enabled to become a father because he considered him faithful who had made the promise. And that's a key point here, a key element of what faith is. One of the primary features of faith is that it's trusting that God will do what he has said he would do. And here we see Abraham trusted and counted him faithful who had made this promise here. And in response to that, God did something for him. God enabled him to become the father, even though he and his wife were both past age. Next example, we'll jump down all the way to Moses and the children of Israel in Egypt. Here we see verse 24, by faith Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. So this is when he rejected his Egyptian upbringing and chose, in verse 25, to be mistreated along with the people of God, rather to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a short time. And then on the other side, what God did in response to faith, we see down in verse 29, by faith the people passed through the Red Sea as on dry land. Again, their faith is what God saw, and because of that faith, God opened the Red Sea and allowed them to cross over on dry land. Verse 30 says, by faith the walls of Jericho fell. Again, that faith was when they exercised that faith by marching around the walls of Jericho. And in response to that, the thing God did for them was to bring the walls of Jericho down. So we see here this interplay throughout the chapter that by faith, men and women did things, but also in response to their faith, God did things for them. And this is the highlight, the primary focus of this chapter. But again, the theme is from that verse 2, trying to emphasize that it was faith. It was faith behind every action, faith behind every word. Faith was the backdrop from which all of these great men and women did their great feats. Let's go to the next question. The context of chapter 11 includes Hebrews 10, 35 through 39. Based on that context, what do you think the application of chapter 11 is? So zooming out from chapter 11, looking at the broader context, chapter 10, verse 35 says, so do not throw away your confidence. It will be richly rewarded. So we see here, there's an encouragement to hold on to your confidence, saying you need to persevere so that when you have done the will of God, that you will receive what he has promised. Again, encouraging them that in a little while, the one who is coming will come and will not delay. So again, the encouragement here is that they hold on to their faith. We saw this also in chapters 3 and chapter 4. We've seen this throughout Hebrews. Saw it in chapter 2 as well. Don't let the things that we've heard slip. Hold on to those things. Chapter 3 says that we need to hold the beginning of our confidence steadfast to the end. Chapter 4 says the message we've heard, we need to mix it with faith. Repeatedly, the encouragement is to hold on to your faith. Don't let go of your faith. The time is getting long. The time of the promise is getting long. This, of course, in the context is talking about the coming of Jesus, but all the promises that we've received of God. We have promises of victory over sins, and we still find ourselves struggling. But hold on the beginning of your confidence steadfast to the end, for yet a little while, and he that is coming will come, and he will grant us that victory over sin. We see a long time in coming in some situations in our life that we've been asking God for, and we feel like he's not answering our prayer, but he's promised to hear the prayer of faith, and he's promised to give us the good things that are desires of our heart. And yet the time is long. It seems that it's not changing, that God is not hearing, God is not answering. But it says, what does it say? Do not throw away your confidence. It will be richly rewarded. Jumping down to 37. For in just a very little while, he who is coming will come and will not delay. And he will answer all of these prayers that we have prayed to him. So this is the broader context here that we jump into chapter 11. The last verse of chapter 10 says, but we are not of those who shrink back and are destroyed, but of those who believe and are saved. So two classes of people, those who shrink back from their faith and those who do not shrink back, but they believe and are saved. We're not of this group, we're of this group. And then chapter 11 begins to describe this group, the ones who believe and are saved. And so then now we're just he's giving an example and saying, look at the group that we're in, this second group here, and look at the result of their faith. Look at the result of their faith. Their faith that they held fast to, their faith that they did not give up, the confidence that they did not let go of, that faith was richly rewarded, as it just said in the passage. And then jumping into chapter 12, we find here, therefore, verse 1, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, that second group, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. This brings us to the next question. According to chapter 12, verses 1 through 3, how can Jesus help us in this race? This race here, in the context again, is talking about the race, the journey, the struggle, the race to hold on to our faith, to follow and do the will of God, that after we've done the will of God, we might obtain what he has promised. How does Jesus help us according to these verses? Well, the first thing is in verse 2. It says we should be doing this, running this race that's been marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus. Or other translations, looking unto Jesus, who is the author and perfecter of our faith. Well, the picture that's being painted here is that we're jogging, we're going in a race, we're running now, we're sprinting. Maybe it's not a fast sprint, it's a long race. We're jogging here. And far ahead in the distance, we're not looking and focusing on the finish line. We're not looking and focusing on the cheering crowd. We're not looking and focusing on the hills that we're going to go up and the pitfalls that may catch us, the obstacles in the way. We're not looking at those things. We're fixing our eyes on the champion who has already gone and crossed the finish line. And we're looking at him primarily as an example. And that's the great word I want to introduce here. As an example, this is in verse 3. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinful men, so that you will not grow weary, you're running, and lose heart. So we're looking at him and the fact that Jesus was able to endure. That's right there in verse 2. Fixing our eyes on him, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross. That was the race marked out for him. And so we're looking again, not at the finish line, not at the cheering crowd, not at the hills, not at the ditches. We're looking to Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. What does that mean practically? What does that mean for you, for me, in our daily Christian walk? Each of us comes to some challenge, something that's trying to pull us away from our confidence in Jesus. Whether it be in his ways, we have Jesus telling us, calling us through his word, calling us through some other circumstance or some message, telling us to go a different way, approach something differently, change our attitude towards a person, change our treating, how we treat that person, change the way we work, be more faithful in our job, or change the way that we perform duties with our family, change the way we do something. He's calling us to something, but we're tempted to not trust that that's best for us. We're tempted to not trust, even if we believe it is best for us, we're tempted to not believe that we can actually, by his strength, overcome and do that thing. But what the passage is calling us to is look to Jesus. Look to Jesus. He endured the cross. And the same principles that got him through the cross are the same principles that will get us through every challenge, every ditch, every mountain, every difficulty that we may face in this race. What brought him through? He came to that climax there in the garden, came to the decision. What are you going to do, Jesus? Are you going to continue in the race, or are you going to give up? Are you going to stray off the path and go your own will? Jesus, just like we have to do, confronted and said, my will is to get off of this course. My will is to let go of this cup. But nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done. This is the test that comes to each of us in every way. Are we going to trust the will of God? Are we going to trust that his loving hand has measured out that cup, that it is, that we are capable by his grace to endure that cup? Or are we going to get off the course? Even after Gethsemane, we see Jesus going to Calvary. And when he's on the cross repeatedly, 3 times we see, in many accounts, 3 times we see him they're calling him saying, get off the cross. If you're really the Son of God, get off the cross. If you're the Son of God, come off the cross and save us. Well, if you're the Son of God, get off the cross. Get off the course. The race marked out for him, that was the cross. But he's being called to come off, to stray from the course. Just a little bit. Just come off, Jesus. Come off. Be entangled by this sin. Be beset by these challenges. But no, Jesus stayed the course and put his confidence in his Father and endured to the end. Looking at him, fixing our eyes on him, that champion, that victor, by those same principles. Why did he do it? Because he knew God was with him. He knew the Father loved him. He remembered the voice of God at his baptism. He remembered the way his Father had cared for him throughout his life. He remembered the fellowship of his Father. With those same memories in hand, we can endure any challenge. When we remember the way that God has protected us, God has cared for us, God has spoken to us, God has been enduring with us, forgiven us, God has provided for us. When we remember all of these things, they give us the strength to keep going in that race. And we can endure just like our Savior Jesus. Though it's challenging, we can hold steadfast to the end. Next question and last question. In your life, what are some ways you have seen Jesus fulfill the 2 roles listed in chapter 12, verse 2? It says, fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter. or the author and the finisher in other translations, the beginner and the completer. The beginning of our faith is started by Jesus. And I believe all of us, when we look back on our life, we can say the reason we started this journey, the reason we got in this race is because of something that God did. We simply responded, or in many cases, in my case, we simply stopped rebelling against what God was doing to author that faith. But not only that, it says as well, he's on this side too. The only way we'll make it, in Hebrews 3, we saw it, it says, we hold the beginning of that confidence steadfast to the end. The only way we will make it is by that same Jesus who started us out, carrying us, that same work he started, finishing it to the end, and being the finisher of our faith. And this is the way I've seen it. I'm sure you can think of it in your own experience, that it's him that has started you and it's him that has brought you thus far. And we can be confident that it is him that will lead us on to the end.